Step into the world of Pedro Reyes. Discover how this revolutionary artist uses his craft as a force for social engagement and change. Uncover the ideas that fuel his creativity and witness the transformative power of art. Time to dive in.
Hello, Pedro. How are you?
Very good, and you?
I'm doing well. Are you
Very
in
nice to
Mexico
meet
City?
you, Yuri.
Likewise. It's funny because we talk via email for weeks now, and we get a sense that we know each other, but we haven't had the chance to have a virtual face-to-face yet.
Right.
Hey,
Tell me.
I was gonna say, are you in Mexico City now?
Yes. This is my studio, and I am, actually, usually there's a lot of noise because we're, doing sculptures and many things at once. And I told them that we were doing this, so it's quiet for an hour.
That's all we get. 1 hour of silence. We can talk. Well, now tell me about the dynamic of the studio. I mean, how many people are working there, and what's like a day operation looks like?
Um, it's actually a big team. I would say that we're between like 25, 28 people. Depending on the projects that we're doing, there's different departments. There's like a stone carving shop, a welding shop, a wood shop. There's like a part that is more administrative where we're doing planning of exhibitions, where we have also we're editing film. We're making films, so we are also making kind of a lot of post production to a film that we're just completing. Then we have a library that is a public library, and there's 3 people working on the library because we have like a community of about 500 regular users,
Wow.
and we lend books and records and artworks and different things. So like in all these different areas, there's like these different very different activities, and it's curious because when I am in the studio, I try to be as much as I can. I actually this is like my favorite place in the world. I it's hard for me to wish for vacations because my work is like the thing I enjoy most. But I kind of gravitate. I go from one station to the other, often having like meetings that only last few seconds, no, like to see how things are going. So I think that I may be a micromanager, but there's a lot of things that are just like kind of emerging at once that I have to be always on the look for what everyone is doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the film that you're working on?
Yes, this is a film that that is called Under the Cloud, and it's a film that I shot in New Mexico on occasion of a show I had now at Site Santa Fe, which is a contemporary art museum that commissioned this film. And I've been working for the last 3 years on the issue of nuclear disarmament. So my interest at first was, talking about like abolition of nuclear weapons. But through certain connections in New Mexico, I was following on YouTube an activist called Leona Morgan that I found very inspiring. Someone who has been fighting uranium mining, and she introduced me also to other people that call themselves downwinders, like people who live downwind from radioactive sites, sometimes because of nuclear testing that happened in the 50s, 60s, or uranium mining, or also nuclear waste that affects the people, because of radioactive cancers and a number of other issues. And that actually, like I mean, we made the film quite fast. I only shot it in December, and now we finished it. It was like a very fast process. It's like a half-hour film, but it covers what you could call the nuclear fuel chain. Like something that is how the uranium is extracted, often using water, which is a problem because it contaminates the aquifer. So it's like fracking, but much worse because it turns waters radioactive, and this is an area that where waters is quite scarce. Like and cities are struggling to have a future without being able to bring water. So the fact that the few kind of deposits of water that are there become radioactive, basically spoil them forever. And then there's that you could call is the front end, like of the nuclear fuel chain. Like the back end is the nuclear spent fuel that there's 100 plus nuclear plants in the United States that are holding on to all this nuclear waste, and nobody wants it. They try to put it in Nevada in a mountain called Yucca Mountain, that what they build like a kind of a giant bunker inside this mountain, and Nevada rejected it, and now they want to push for the waste facility in New Mexico. So basically, the film is I made this film with indigenous peoples that are fighting against this because it's Diné, that we usually know them as Navajo, but they call themselves Diné, and also Acoma and other First Nations that are fighting against these nuclear waste brought to their lands. No? And the broad topic of the film you could call is nuclear colonialism, like the idea that oftentimes the places where these nuclear tests or nuclear mining or radioactive mining happen is in places that are isolated, far from the mainstream society, and because obviously you would not be able to do this in a city, no?
That's it. It makes me wonder, because this is a subject that you've been dealing with for quite some time right now. And why did you choose the movie as a vehicle of communication now? Because before you had exhibitions, you have art, you did the sculptures, everything to explain and talk about the subject. But now you are pursuing the movie route. Is that so you feel like you can reach a broader audience, or just another way for you to communicate an idea in a different medium?
Well, film is something that allows you to have a narrative that you won't be able to have with sculpture or with other mediums, no? Because you can incorporate the actual voices of the real actors in the world, no? Like the people who are the real agents of this struggle. But also, I believe that it's very interesting. Like working with nuclear issues is something that was very much in the mind of everyone on the planet in the 80s. That was like the peak of attention on the risk of nuclear war and on the anti-nuclear movement. And then after the fall of the Berlin Wall, people thought that the Cold War was over, and that and there was actually like a big reduction in nuclear arsenals from 90,000 to 13,000 nukes. So it was a kind of a good moment between Reagan and Gorbachev that managed to do this massive reduction of nuclear weapons. And since in the like all the 90s and what is going until the Ukraine war, the subject fall totally off the attention of the people, which means that also like perhaps like for instance like millennials, Generation C, etc., have not been kind of very acquainted with the real like a tragedy that we will face in case of entering nuclear war, which by the way we are closer now than we were ever. Like we're closer to see nuclear war than we were in the Cold War. So it's a little bit like like a strange phenomena because for instance, like I'm kind of like having like a sort of regression or going back to the 80s when I was like a teen, and I felt this kind of very vividly. I'm Generation X, so I think that was like kind of a very part of everyone's mind awareness, and now they look you a little bit as if you were crazy. Like, why do you worry about that? But one of the things that I have found most useful is to watch all the films that were made in this like 70s, 80s period, because filmmakers actually played a very important role in arms reduction. Like for instance, like the reason why Reagan, which I don't like Reagan, but like you have to give him that like that he saw this film called The Day After, and that it made him kind of talk to Gorbachev about this big reduction on nuclear warfare. So films have played a very important role in the past, and the films that I'm doing are a little bit a mix of the history of the anti-nuclear movement since the 50s, because like immediately after Hiroshima, there started to be like a kind of a movement to try to ban nuclear weapons, and then that continues to produce like a number of films like Doctor Strangelove or like a Threat, different The War Game, like really good movies. And what I'm working now is the film that I released now in February was like the first episode, so to speak, of a number of films that are about like different periods on the anti-nuclear movement, but also a cultural history of nuclear war. How it has been portrayed in literature, in music, so it's a lot of these people are still around, and I've been very fortunate to be able to interview them. So that's that. I like the goal is to like I believe that once you see at least fragments of these films, you are converted to the cause. Like you realize how dangerous this situation is, and how much we need to act on it, and then that's a sort of call to action, no? So that's a little bit of the motivation to do film.
Is it how important is for you that your art process or any project you're working on has something to do with current issues in society? Is that something that you always try to connect together, or you kind of just goes where it takes you? Something is more personal, but something has a broad attention, like the project they were talking about, nuclearization.
It's a good question because it's true that a lot of times I try to address world problems with my work, and I think that this is something that I don't know. Like I like that my work allows me to uh, first to understand the world we live in. No, like I believe that art making can be at first a very good opportunity to study a subject. When I undertake a project, I first find a lot of books about the subject. It's an opportunity to talk to people, to watch certain films, etc. So maybe I didn't have like the chance to study economy or history or things that I would like to gain knowledge on. But like a project, an art project becomes like that opportunity. And then, but also I believe that I don't necessarily think that art has to do something for the world, but if you want it to, that's certainly a possibility. If you want to make an art that can have an impact, it's possible. To put an example, of another recent piece that I made for this show that is up now at site in Santa Fe. Uh, uh, 10 years ago, I had done, well, more than 10 years, maybe 13 years ago, I had done a project called Palas por Pistolas, where, I organized a campaign to collect weapons voluntarily, there was incentives that were given in exchange for the like gift cards, etc., that were given in exchange for weapons, and we collected 1,527 weapons that were melted and made into 1,527 shovels to plant the same number of trees. And that project was seen by Miranda Viscoli, who's like a person that I re-encountered now on occasion of this show at site. And she had kind of done a sort of replica of my project called Guns to Gardens, where she organizes weapon donations, like kind of gun buybacks, and then she started to make little shovels for gardening. So for me, it was like very inspiring to see that my artwork has kind of a triggered another initiative with the same spirit, because precisely I believe that ideas are only useful if someone else can use them. For the biggest praise that you can have is for that someone is using your idea, no? And I told her, like, let's make a collaboration, and we made some beautiful gun bases that we took the barrel of a shotgun or a rifle, and then other gun parts to create a flower or a base where you can put a flower in the barrel of the gun, like a kind of a single stem holder, no? And we decided to create a full economic cycle where these gun bases that are sold for $1,500, which the sale of one of these bases, we are able to take to kind of buy 10 gift cards of $150. That is the exchange for a handgun. So we made 60 bases. So when we finish selling those, we would have kind of removed 600 guns from the streets. And so this is an example of direct action. No? Direct action is a concept often from anarchist mindset. Like that you don't wait for to appeal to a government to do a change, but you just go ahead and do it yourself. And it's been very successful. We did this with high school kids from New Mexico, that have been affected by gun violence in these neighborhoods. Actually, it was very moving to hear stories from some of the kids that took part in the workshop about friends of them that have died in because of gun violence, and this is something that is like an object that has artistic qualities, but also is a sort of system or circuit of real transformation, no? Because we're basically removing guns that are, whose only purpose is to kill, and then, turning them into something which is exactly the opposite, like a decorative object that is holding a flower, but it's a sort of subversion of the function of the object. But by that transformation, we're also creating an economic model that can continue to take guns out of the streets, no? Which is kind of I believe in naivety. I believe in having a very kind of a utopian idealist approach to precisely the most unsurmountable or untractable problems. I think that one has to avoid falling on the trap of skepticism or cynicism, and just like trust that you will be able to conduct change, and actually to find some few colleagues that are going to do like a kind of these initiatives with you, and just like go ahead and do it. And that's the most eloquent form of critique, no? Like kind of actually going ahead and changing things yourself. Even if it's in a kind of a small scale.
I like what you said about the aspect of doing yourself, take action, not wait for permission. Is that something that you always had it with you as a child growing up? Something that you learned from your parents, or something that developed throughout your life? You start getting the urgency to act upon, issues, or career-wise, or even exhibitions.
You're asking about like what, like work? What?
No, I'm saying I'm curious about. I like the fact that you said take action. Instead of waiting for somebody to do something, do yourself, right? Even in a small change. Is that something? I'm curious. Is this something that has always been with you? You always been someone, even as a kid, who took action. Someone who was very spontaneous and act on things that you wanted to pursue.
I mean, like I think that there's been kind of things that perhaps I encountered like later in life. What I am interested in the concept of direct action is that, okay, well, you have like a kind of a spontaneous desire to do things, no? Mm-hmm. But it's quite possible that that you don't feel that you are good enough or prepared enough to do that. And the truth is that you're never ready. You have to just launch yourself into doing these things, and I believe that in doing first and theorizing after. Because if you theorize first, you can get like a sort of intellectual paralysis, no? Where you will feel that you have to continue preparing yourself before taking action, and so that would be one thing. The second thing would be that it's okay to ask for help. That you're allowed to ask for solidarity and from help from others, and that you may find more solidarity that you want to believe. That's because a lot of times you think, well, maybe you launch yourself into doing some things that you don't have like resources to compensate others for their time, etc. But one thing that I have also learned is that helping others is actually a very rewarding experience. You may feel that you lose energy by helping others, but actually that sense of purpose or that sense of satisfaction that you get by seeing that someone will find your efforts meaningful is highly rewarding. And we are all the time, like producing content or producing like just work for the world. A lot of times, like just like hoping that someone will be an audience for that and will join us, no? So I think that has been. I mean, like I've been kind of extremely fortunate to have people who join me in different projects and that have also kind of felt that enthusiasm for doing things, no? I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. I was going to follow up and wondering if that's one of the reasons you made the library open to the public.
Yeah, well, that's for instance, like, like for instance, I have been very blessed in my life having access to fantastic libraries, and I have learned that, well, by experience, I believe that there's always a book for something, no? Like whatever you want to know, there's a book for it, and the problem was, like trying to have access to libraries in Mexico is that there was like a moment decades ago where the culture changed around books. There was like a wrong perception among librarians that they would be punished if the users would not return the books, like kind of a criminalized for like books that are missing from the stocks of the libraries, no? Which was not a real thing, but like a library stopped lending, which is their main function. And librarians started to expect people to come to the library and read the books there. But like a book is something that you have to take with you everywhere. Like you most of the time may read it in the bed or in the bus or like wherever you go. So you have to always carry the book with you. And I started to try to persuade other libraries to bring back a good system of book lending, and but I decided to do it myself, like just as another example of direct action, because I was like not sure that I would like kind of get libraries to change their policies. So just out of impatience, like I started to do it myself as a social experiment. And I believe that this is like a kind of a highly rewarding also experience, like, well, sometimes it's hard. It's like seeing your girlfriend kiss another man or something, like because like some books are like, oh, I bought this book in this kind of a farm and it's the only copy, and you just let people like kind of take it, right? But there's also a vicarious joy of seeing that someone else has same interest as you, that you are not alone in this kind of a very niche interests, but basically I think that something that is very interesting about this model of the library is that it's a model that somehow survives in the contemporary world outside of capitalism. Like the library by definition is something that you cannot monetize, because its principle is that, okay, there has to be, at some point as civilization, we realized that there had to be, that culture could not be a luxury. Like that you could not like prevent people from educating themselves because of their income, So that was a big accomplishment for civilization to form libraries, and they've been around for 5,000 years. So I think that that the library can be a very interesting model, because we're surrounded by objects, like in our houses, in our workspaces, etc. There's tons of objects that are only used once every few years, and all the other time that they're just sitting there collecting dust, they have all this excess capacity. So I think that one of the great things about technology is that now you can create a more granular control of where objects are, and the idea, this is what we're working at now. We're part of what we're doing in the studios, that we're developing this app, which is like a library card on your phone. Like is this we actually now in the third generation, because the technology changes very quickly, and we have to rebuild the app again with the new technology that is coming every 6 months. But it's very nice that that basically, like, the idea is that I believe that there could be an alternative economy where you, instead of being an owner, you're a sort of steward of objects, and you can keep them with you, but you can also lend them to other people, and obviously that people depending on how they make use of them and etc., they can get a score as users of this access to the commons, like where we have all this excess capacity being tapped by others, and you don't have to necessarily acquire more stuff. That would also have like a kind of ecological impact by, sometimes we need a drill, and then we buy a drill, but we only use it for 1 week, and then it's sitting there for just like, imagine like the endless number of things that you could like kind of borrow from each other. And that's something that that I see as a kind of economics experiment about this, because also we all collect some kind of thing, and rarely we have a chance to show our collections. And collecting is also a kind of form of knowledge, like a kind of I don't know, if you collect like toys or cards or whatever you collect, you're creating a map of a certain cultural milieu. So the library app, the idea is that with Laquilo, what we're doing is that we want everyone to become a librarian, but also the app allows you to organize your collections, but also to allow to lend objects from your collections and have control over who has what and when do they have to return it. So it's a very kind of simple system, but it's granular in the sense that, for instance, each item has a value, and then you can kind of take measure, or it adds up. If when oftentimes, for instance, every day someone comes to my house and takes 10 or 12 books with them. Each of those books may cost like at least $100. So they're, accessing, let's say, $1,200 in value. And every time they use it, so at the end of the year, they maybe have access to $40,000, which is money that they didn't have to spend. So what is very interesting is that we are kind of monetizing I wouldn't call it a monetization, but it's certainly like a gamification of or where there's a granular kind of a accounting of how much value you have access, which equals money that you didn't have to spend. So it's a sort of negative capital, no? In the worst case that someone like loses an object and don't returns it, it's like, okay, well, you charge that person that value. So in the worst case, it becomes a marketplace, but that's not the intention. The intention is to just allow people to share stuff, because I believe that, in the future, we will be living in a sort of a society where we will have like important disruptions in terms of, for instance, like natural disasters or migration, etc., like kind of a climate change, etc., where you can either go the way of stockpiling things and kind of trying to prepare for the future. But in reality, I believe that, that what is more important is to create a sort of different personal capital that is not measured by how much money you have, but how trustworthy you are, which is exactly the opposite of what crypto was, because crypto was basically kind of based on, like a distrust of institutions and like a kind of excessive computing, by all the blockchain, and I am, and here I'm interested in doing something that the technology is very light, in the sense that it doesn't require excessive computing. But you actually like kind of the opposite is the opposite of crypto, because in crypto you had like kind of an entirely virtual currency, but the world is full of stuff, so what I'm interested is not in the circulation of digital materials, but how do we do with all the stuff that is not made of bytes but made of atoms, all the stuff that we have, because that's the kind of stuff that we really use. So it's about like moving around the stuff, like kind of having access to this whatever stuff you need, and then having like the technology be the control and communication to have access to that stuff. But something that is very important for me is this idea that the behavior, like the citizens' behavior, or like the community, you as member of a community, by lending your stuff, you're contributing to the community, but by also using other people's stuff, you also show how trustworthy you are. And I believe that can be measured. That that you can create another kind of wealth that is like based on your generosity, and
how would you measure that? Is it based in generosity? What other attributes would you use to measure that?
Well, for instance, in the like as a librarian in the Tlaquilo app, for instance, you have like different indexes. One is like, okay, if I list objects into this system, we're starting with books, but eventually can be cameras, tools, like lighting equipment, cars, whatever. Every item that you upload into the platform becomes it's like a contribution, virtual contribution that you're doing into the community by making this stuff available. So that is measured by one calculator, and then you have another calculator that measures how much stuff you have access to, like how much stuff from others you have used, and then you aggregate both. But you can the interesting thing is that both indexes or kind of accounts are independent. They represent parallel manifestations to what we usually understand as capital. Like because capital in the end is like money that you have withheld from the system, and that is like kind of a not being spent yet. Like I mean, you may put it as an investment here or there, but like but like I was kind of I was all I since crypto started, I was extremely skeptical about it, because like if I'm a Marxist, so in this sense, like it's a turbo capitalist idea, because like you extract value from the people who actually work, and then it becomes more rarefied through all these kind of financial instruments. And then you saw like these huge destructions of capital by these virtual currencies that like that then went nowhere. I mean, like that was people's work that was thrown down the flush. I mean, like, and also resources from the planet, like energy. So like I am interested in how alternative economies can have also environmental impact and social impact. So that's why like these social experiments that we're doing about like there's like these things have always existed in the fringe, like of anarchist communities, etc. But what is missing is the technology, like the technology that can actually make them efficient.
That's a good segue for my next question. I'm sure I think I have an idea where we're gonna go with this, in your opinion. But what are your thoughts about what's going on in our world with NFTs and the metaverse? I mean, is that something that you even entertain to explore, or is just something that you're not interested in?
Well, like I mean, for me, NFTs are the most laughable thing that exists. Like I really like for me, they're a joke. Sorry, I mean, like but like the thing is that, for instance, like this is something that is just like a JPEG or something that like people that should be free, and people are charging for it. Like like it's a fad. Same with virtual reality. Like I have witnessed like kind of a fourth waves of virtual reality, like since the 90s. I mean, it's something that I had yeah. I mean, like, why would you spend money on something that is immaterial when you can have like an actual object that you can enjoy physically, and you can pass on, etc. Like the thing is that, I mean, like anything digital is like the kind of a most vulnerable that kind of holder of information. I mean, like in the sense that, for instance, like you have a hard drive, and then like 10 years later you cannot find the cable to bring those materials out of that hard drive. Like a technology, like the paradox of technology also is that the faster that it develops, like the faster it becomes obsolete. Like and to so like if you have also, there's like a kind of I mean, I always think that new ideas come from old books. So I have, I think that actually we have devolved, like kind of in a lot of subjects, we are becoming more primitive and less advanced because there's something about technology. I mean, like I love technology, but I also dread technology. And so I'm selective about like what things I become my enthusiast and not, because technology is like a little bit like kind of looking through the rear mirror. I mean, you have to look at it from the rear mirror, because for every thing that it's like a kind of a mental crutch, like it's a prosthesis that we develop to try to move faster, but that prosthesis creates an atrophy. Like this is something about the paradox of evolution, is that for one thing to evolve, another has to be atrophied. So for instance, people in other centuries could like make all this kind of mathematical calculations by mind, or speak in verse, or had like a certain brain plasticity that, because of we have kind of all these calculators and kind of tools around us, and now with artificial intelligence, there's also an atrophy that comes with this surrogate brain that we have now. We're experiment like a kind of the biggest Turing test, a planetary Turing test, where we're changing the definition of what intelligence is. So I think that is extremely important to kind of the same way that we need to exercise, just to not become like unhealthy blobs, we have to also continue to find meaning and access in stuff from other era. I don't know. I mean, like oftentimes, like you're talking about, like kind of the metaverse or etc., which for me is just like a kind of I would put it almost in the kind of category of video games, in the sense that there's like kind of engines that make ever more realistic environments, but the premise often is like a kind of a content wise in terms of, for instance, like the narratives of I don't know. I mean, like I don't want to generalize, but but I mean, I don't know. I mean, like Meta has failed tragically with this attempt of the metaverse. But I'm not the person to necessarily who has you tell you that. It's like clearly they're kind of like a lot of IT companies are laying off massive amounts of people. So I think that there's I mean, nobody. I don't have I would not put like kind of I mean, I think that the pandemic was traumatic enough to try to reduce or Zoom or kind of a screen time with others as much as we can. We don't want more screen time in our interpersonal connections. That's my thoughts, but it's a personal opinion.
Do you find, because we're so consumed by screen time and all those new technologies, sometimes you as a creative person, or even a young creative architect, designer, or even a sculptor, find themselves maybe confused to find their own voice because there's so much going on? Do you feel it's very important to just connect and walk away for some time to really, search what do you want to say as an artist?
The thing is that obviously technology is super addictive, and I'm addicted to it. I look at the screen, especially my phone, like twice as I wish I did. I mean, like the interesting thing is that there is a symbiosis between this thing we created and the biological part of or that supports it, that we are now like one thing, it's actually like impossible to divide, and you can like use that and modify that to be part of your interests, for sure. But perhaps the reason why I am kind of so keen on like sharing books or sharing like a kind of things that are not on the internet is because people think that everything is on the internet, that there's nothing farther from the truth. Like for instance, like only 1% of what is found in books has made its way to the cloud or to the internet. Like if I take one book from my bookshelf, most probably it will be a book that is like at least 40 years old, and that doesn't exist on the internet, and so they're kind of almost mutually exclusive universes. So it's also it wouldn't make sense to print the internet and make books out of all the stories and Facebook posts that people do. So what is very interesting now is that, for instance, with the emergence of artificial intelligence, the AI is kind of a thinking with a set of content that is partial, like it's only the 1% of what mankind has actually produced. So I believe that it will be more relevant now to continue to have access to all this kind of print stuff and etc. Because in a way, it's important to somehow just kind of have that window to other periods in history. It's very important to escape the present, because the present is very easy to kind of fall for the current fad, and then you make an effort to catch up, and then by the time you catch up, there's a new thing, etc. So you can easily get lost by playing this game. And I think that in order to avoid that, it's very important to have a kind of perspective where you realize that these ideas that you thought that were new are not actually that new, or that you could think of their other ways, because in other times people would think had another explanations for things, etc. It doesn't mean that the current mindset is necessarily the best mindset. I mean, in the case, for instance, of nuclear war, to put an example, I mean, we're closer to nuclear war than we ever been, but no one is worrying about it. No one is doing anything about it. The anti-nuclear community is just 1,000 people all around the world. It's extremely small when it was in the millions in the 80s. So that's one example of a kind of a extremely important problem that is totally out of focus in our contemporary environment. No, so is for instance, I've been trying to to come up with slogans and kind of phrases to try to explain why this thing is bad and why we should kind of get rid of nuclear weapons. And then I have to find these resources in books and films from the 80s and 60s and 70s, because millions of people were thinking about it, and millions of people were kind of developing very compelling arguments, which I won't find in this time. I have to go back 50 years. And this is a kind of the pandemic was also an interesting example. No, you had to, you have had pandemics every 200 years, and there was all this kind of histories of how people live through those times. So I think that history is a kind of very important to get this sort of to put things in their kind of a more right perspective. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, in this part of the show, I like to ask three questions to every guest that comes in. Okay, and I think you're gonna be in a difficult situation right now, but I'm gonna ask you to recommend a book that we
Hmm.
should read,
Okay.
a movie or a TV show, something that you think is important for us to check it out, and also a person to listen to. Who else? Somebody else that we should invite to be part of the podcast.
All right. Very good questions. Um, okay. Um, I like very much a book by a psychologist called Milton Erickson. And this book is called My Boys Will Go With You. He was a psychiatrist that kind of fell into some disease. I think it was, that prevented him from like a full body paralysis. And through kind of a self hypnosis, he managed to kind of cure himself from this disease, and also help like have a practice and a family and a full life. So it's very interesting to see how like a person who was suddenly like kind of isolated physically with like beyond his capacities managed to come out of this uh, deep paralysis. That so I and it's told with, it's like kind of a series of tales that he used. So it's his, the book is My Boys Will Go With You by Milton Erickson. That's the book. Then for a film, because we've been talking about this issue of nuclear war, I would recommend Threads. It's a film from 1984, I think. Uh, it's a kind of a Australian British production. It takes place in Britain, and I think it's the best movie about nuclear war ever made. Uh, Maybe you, I mean, or your audience may be very resourceful, so probably will be able to find it somewhere in the internet. And then a person that to
Yeah.
invite. Uh, I would probably recommend Professor Doris Sommer from Harvard University. She's created this project called Cultural Agents, which is how culture change society. Um, yeah, Professor Doris Sommer at Harvard University. She has been a great mentor and inspiration. I'm happy to give you her contact.
That would be
Yes.
lovely. Pedro, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we've been following you. We know about your work and your art, but today it's been a pleasure to get to know the men behind the sculpture,
Thank you.
and thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yuri, it was a pleasure talking to you.